Hi everyone, this is Murray back again, speaking from the Tasman district of Nelson about the Waimea Dam fiasco. In presentation 1 I explained why the dam was not needed and won't work. First up, let me answer a question which has been asked of me. Why create these videos when the dam is 3/4 constructed? That's a good question, but I won't be answering that until presentation 3. So this part 2 is going to talk about economics, community benefits, environmental proportion, funding, liabilities, cost and risk. So let's get started. Economic reports. So let me talk about what is a serious flaw in these reports. They make the false assumption that allocation cuts are the same as reduced pumpages. They aren't. So here I have reproduced a graph from presentation 1, and to make this point, this is the delta zone, the largest water management zone on the plains, irrigators only in this instance, but it applies to all the zones and most of the individual pumpers. So here we have no cuts, 20% cut, 80% allocation, 35% cut, 50% cut. And here are the pumpages over the years 204 to 221. So these are 12-week pumpages. So these are summer pumpages. They are very representative of water rationing situation. Step 1 cuts, step 2, step 3. Pumpage is not constrained by allocation cuts. So let's talk about the economic gains to be made from having a dam. The reports have projected hundreds of millions of dollars over the next 25 years, maybe $1 billion in benefits. So Waimea Water Limited in a pamphlet have quoted 55 million gains in the first 2 years from when the dam starts. Now this graph here shows the annual value of exports in hundreds of millions of dollars of apples, berries and kiwi fruit. And I've drawn a trend line in here. So this figure here says that on average $28 million increase in annual exports will accrue year by year. So what does this mean in relation to this 55 million gain from the dam? Supposing the dam starts now, does it just represent this trend from the previous 15-20 years, or is it on top of the trend line? So I'll add another 55 million on top of there. Now they don't say, but I suspect that they mean this trend will continue and they are attributing it to the dam. That is not an assumption which can be made. So what do these economic reports say about the consequences, the economic cost of no dam? So I will repeat here that these reports are based on the false assumption that pumpage is constrained by allocation cuts, and they aren't. They haven't reduced water consumption in the past, nor need they in the future. Allocations won't affect them, and that leads to flawed conclusions. So one of the reports, Northington and Partners, Waimea Dam Economic Cost No Dam Alternative. So it was prepared at the request of Waimea Irrigators Limited. I suspect it was paid for by Tasman District Council ratepayers, but if you have a comment on that, please send it to me. So I've taken one conclusion, and that is that without the dam we'll be worse off over 25 years of more than $1 billion. That is not credible. Economists have criticised this report, Peter Fraser being one of them, on economic grounds. I am criticising it, as I'm repeating myself here. These false assumptions lead to flawed conclusions. So let's have a look at another couple of quotes I've taken from this report. So one of the things is the dam will lead to increased household incomes. One of them somewhere said increased wages? Well, we will see. And could you attribute increased wages to a dam? I don't think so. Let me read this one in full. Despite recent increases in cost estimates for dam building, avoiding loss to current production, providing gain for current irrigated land use, and providing scope for new irrigated land uses outweigh the cost by a sufficient margin that estimates would need to be badly awry to obtain a different result. Well, this was prepared when the cost of the dam was some $76 million plus 6 or so sunk cost. We now know that the dam is north of 200 million, and I would suggest the assumptions and estimates are badly awry. So environmental proportion. 30% of the volume of the dam has been attributed to the need for environmental flow and community benefits. So how has that worked out? Well, Joseph Thomas, who has played 2 roles in the last 15 or so years, one as a TDC resource staffer, and secondly as the project manager for the dam. In other words, a project manager working on behalf of the Irrigators Committee, Waimea Water Augmentation Committee. So they worked out the deficits day to day. So they commissioned a table and they said, let's take some scenarios here. Minimum flow 600, minimum flow 1100 litres a second at the Appleby Bridge. And let's take all these drought return periods so that we can ensure against not having restrictions at these various scenarios. So to work out environmental volume, they took the extreme 1 in 100 year, avoiding any restrictions, 600 litres a second, 13.8 litres a second. The difference between those two is about 4 million cubes. Hence, the logic goes, that's how much water we need for minimum flow. Now there's a couple of points here. This 0.6, 600 litres a second, is entirely a creation of this Irrigators Committee. If they wanted to choose a minimum, they should have chosen the current minimum, which was 800 litres a second. So choosing these assumptions here, 1 in 100 year, let's have 1100 litres a second environmental flow, hence you need 4 million cubes. The logic is seriously flawed. Let's talk here about how much water is needed to be stored in the dam to meet its sole operating parameter, which is to maintain 1.1 cubics, 1100 litres a second at the Appleby Bridge, just above the Appleby Bridge. So this is the sole operating characteristic for the dam, neglecting a bit about salt and another few things that don't really matter. So I've worked out how much water is needed from 04 to near current time when data is available to make some accurate estimates. So the shortfall in water at the monitoring point 0506 is 20%, which is about 2.4 million cubes. This year about 500,000 cubes, this year about 1.5 million cubes. So it's the total amount of water which need to be stored from this period up to here is at maximum 2.4 million cubes, mostly virtually nothing. So let's look at 2001. This required some estimates here because they didn't keep a complete record, but I've included it so that we're not avoiding what was a very dry year. So about 50% of the volume of the dam, 6 million cubes, would have been needed in 2001, a very dry period. So over this here for about 20 years, on one occasion we'd need half the water stored in the dam, a quarter of it, and rats and mice along here. The amount of water stored in the dam is phenomenally high. A dam about 1/10 of the size would have served a useful insurance against dry periods in most years. So 30% of the volume of the dam has been dedicated towards environmental flow come community benefits. So the NZIA report about how to pay for the dam came out 2014. Originally it was voluntary subscription, mostly irrigators, maybe a few others, but it faced covering costs. So one way of attracting subscriptions or shareholders is by attributing a portion of the dam's capacity to environmental users to be covered by ratepayers as public goods. Well, this was done without consulting the ratepayers ultimately. So let's look at some confidential minutes from 2011. Councillor Tim King anticipated that someone would provide 30% of the money and represented by the environmental stakeholders. The only environmental stakeholders are Tasman District Council ratepayers. Now, the Local Government Act says that the cost should be borne by those who necessitate the building of infrastructure. So in this case, the dam, irrigators, and if you follow the standard narrative, urban supply. Now, the council decided not to follow the LGA rules and regulations. So in their statement of proposal 2014, before a consulting round, council could not identify a compelling reason to take that approach. In other words, they could not find a compelling reason to ask the irrigators to pay for environmental flow because for whatever reasons they came up with. Now, in fact, there are clearly one party that does take water from the river. Waimea East Irrigation Company pumps from the river. Everyone else pumps from groundwater, has no effect on the river. So the Waimea East Irrigation Company should absolutely have been involved in paying for environmental flow, and they aren't. Irrigators overall have been are funding 0.4 of a million out of the current 60 million cost allocated to environmental flow. I think that's entirely unsatisfactory. Now, this here's a slight aside, but the Ministry for the Environment under the Freshwater Improvement Fund provided Tasman with $7 million for environmental purposes. So if we look down here, the next highest is 5 million over 5 years for Southland and 1.5 million Bay Plenty over 5 years. So on an annual rate, it turns out 2.3 million per year for Tasman, $1 million a year for Southland, and the other bits down here. Now, I'm showing you this table for a couple of reasons. Firstly, let's look at the sort of things which this Freshwater Improvement Fund has been used for in the other regions. Project Dune Lakes, remove pest fish plants, putting in fencing and planting, river engineering, sedimentation hotspots, removal of weed, nutrient reduction, and so on, culverts, reduce new oxygenation system, fish passages, redirect runoffs, fencing, planting, all of that. So that continues down here, except for Tasman. It's not used for any of that. It's used to fund a dam. Freshwater improvement to fund a dam. What dams do not do is improve water quality. At the very best, they won't reduce it. At the worst, they make a very, very major impact in reducing water quality. So anyhow, it just so happened that the Minister for the Environment then was our local MP, Nick Smith, and the application by Tasman was declined first time round. They were told to put it in again, and second time round the Minister said that is fine. So let's look at loans information, and in particular the liabilities to Tasman District Council. So Crown Irrigation lent the Irrigators Company 23.5 million. Total liability for TDC is 29 million. Also, the TDC lent Waimea Water Limited, the joint venture company, 8.75 and 3 million, 11.75 million. This is guaranteed by Tasman District Council. So once again, should everything go pear-shaped, this 11.5 million, that 29 million is a liability against the ratepayers. So it's gone from 105 million to 195 million, and so far 50 million of that has been found by TDC, borrowing 50 million off the local government funding agency 25 million has been on lent to Waimea Irrigators Limited, and they have agreed to pay that back through annual water charges to their shareholders. There still leaves 40 million which has not been sorted yet, and plus another 20 or 30 million, which Tasman District Council will need to borrow, and they will need to decide who's going to pay it back. Half of this borrowing here, the 40 million plus that, will be offloaded onto the irrigators as their share of cost overruns. It won't be charged to Waimea Irrigators Limited because they have an agreement that won't happen. So probably those who have affiliated consents, affiliated with the dam, they will be target rated on land value for their share of the cost overruns. It's inequitable, that way of doing it, but that's what it will be. And 50 million compensation will can charge TDC. If TDC do anything which disadvantages those who are affiliated to the dam compared to those who are not affiliated. So the liabilities there, contingent liabilities, are quite extensive. So let's look at this thorny issue of cost. Working figure 2011, 28 million or so to complete the dam. Current estimated cost to complete the dam, which is sometime 2000 and end of 2023, is 195 million. Of course, it will be more. So the important thing in this graph, there were some off ramps. The first one should have been when it went from 42 to 82 million, and almost doubling. That should have been a warning to councillors and indeed all parties that this was going to be an expensive process. Next off ramp, when it went from some 82 million to 105 million. This was when they signed off on the dam. Another warning, and that off ramp should have been taken, and once again it wasn't. So Oxford University did a paper on the cost of building dams worldwide, and Lou Solomon extracted information relevant to dams in New Zealand. And what he extracted from that was a number of things, but one of them was that the average cost of overruns was 96%. Now this was poo-pooed by various people, couldn't possibly happen here. So a quote from the Oxford study: there was overwhelming evidence that cost was systematically biased towards underestimation. The consequence is an increase in overrun percentage. Well, TDC staff had a rebuttal for that, which they presented to councillors, saying that really the Oxford study didn't apply to Tasman for various reasons. But in summary, they said this: the early contractor involvement process, which was what they used instead of tendering a price for the dam, they got a contractor involved, and this process minimised the risk of any underestimation in the construction component of the dam. Well, wasn't that wishful thinking? This is a typical example of best case scenario. Let's not consider anything going wrong. Let's get the dam built. Let's move on. So Roland Toder and Tom Lawton, who live in Golden Bay, and they work internationally to companies that want research done on whether the project is worthwhile spending money on. So they're well practiced on this. And they published a well-researched document in the Golden Bay Weekly 2018 before the dam was signed off. Our view, based on research and peer review analysis of information available, TDC has materially understated the cost and risk of the dam. Well, subsequent events have unfortunately proven them to be exactly correct. So how do the cost of the Waimea Dam stack up against two other local dams, the Maitai Dam built by Nelson and the Kainui Dam built by Tasman District Council, completed in 2006? 0.8 million cubes works out in today dollars $6.12 a stored cube. Maitai Dam, $5 a stored cube. Waimea Dam at sign off, $8.47 a stored cube. Currently $16 a stored cube, considerably more than two other local dams. Now I use the term stored cube because most of this water is not used except in extreme circumstances. So if you take the Maitai Dam, 4 million cubes, The most they've used is 1.5 million cubes. They have the insurance if they need to pay more. So if we look down here, as I indicated before, the Waimea Dam is unlikely to have more than a quarter of its water used. Maybe 1 in 50, 100 years, who knows. Mostly they've got 4 times as much water as they will use. So if you multiply this by 4, you get something in excess of $60 a used cube. $60 a used cube is extremely expensive water. So let's take this risk, which I think Tasman District Council staff, some of them, had a woefully inadequate understanding of. So there was Whanganui District Council had a wastewater treatment plant, 23 million, completely failed. A commissioner looked into it and said council staff failed to display an adequate understanding of the concept of risk and risk management. In my opinion, that applies 100% to Tasman District Council staff. They always take best case scenarios. They may defend themselves on that, of course. Council needs to determine its appetite for risk. It seemed to me that they had a large appetite for risk, and as events have subsequently proven, that risk was far too great. So there's a much quoted P95 level of risk in a quote for 82 million supplied by Becker Bond, an experienced consulting firm, in 2015. P95, 95% chance of coming in under 82 million. Well, how inadequate has that proven to be at currently some 200 million? So Mr Kirby, the engineer for Tasman District Council, advised the council at a meeting, this is at the sign-off meeting, the risk of a fixed price contract would be beyond what could be afforded. Well, that speaks for itself. In other words, if you take a floating price contract, that would be affordable and a fixed price wouldn't. What a contradiction that was, and subsequently has proven how inadequate that sort of approach has been. So that brings me to the end of presentation 2 on funding cost, risk and economics. So in preparing this video and in my research over the last 8 years, I have been extremely disturbed at what I call a lack of objectivity regarding risk and cost. It seemed to me, let's get a dam and let's select a narrative which fulfills the dam agenda. That would explain a lot of what has gone on, where parties have managed to, in my opinion, capture the process of local government to get their special, in this case, dam project over the line. And in that they have succeeded, and it is costing $200 million, most of which is being borne by the ratepayers. So once again, I hope you found this useful, and I look forward to any comments you have, plus or minus ones, about my presentation, and I look forward to seeing you in video 3, which is about local democracy, transparency, misinformation and things like that. So I look forward to seeing you again soon. This is Murray Dawson from Tasman, Nelson.